This conference will now be recorded.
Not quite done that right, have I? I wanted it in the...
Just hit from beginning and you'll be ready to go.
Yeah, there we go. Right, brilliant. Okay, everybody, so my name's Rob Cummings. I'm currently, I'm the Seasonal Performance Improvement Manager for Northern. I've been since joining 5 years ago from Network Rail. I had 16 years with Network Rail. I've also, for the last year, been covering the on-time performance manager's role for the Manchester area, which has been a bit of a poison chalice, as you probably appreciate. So I was asked to do this presentation originally, or to put it together for the Manchester section last year, and it's actually been really helpful for me, just because, you know, I deal with timetable planners all the time. If we get time to show you some work we've been doing with sectional running times, and seeing how it relates to on-time performance of the railway. So in terms of timetables then, so we'll be looking at timescales, producing a timetable and capacity and how you kind of can fit everything that you want to run in. So the railways, it's an inherently flexible network compared with the road transport, which is considerably more ad hoc. You can just jump in your car and drive from A to B, change your mind halfway there and go somewhere else. So all rail traffic movements must be prearranged to exploit the potential capacity, and this is where the timetable comes in. And to the passenger, it's basically our offer, and the passenger that knows that they can turn up at a certain station on a given day at a given time, and that train should arrive and take them to where they want to go within the time advertised. Timetable also dictates the type and number of trains required, and the number of train crew, and basically build your rosters from the timetable. So the timetables are developed by the train and freight operators. Network Rail coordinate and validate the timetable. That's all done now at Milton Keynes. Timetables updated twice a year, May and December. That was a slip of the tongue because obviously this year with COVID-19, the May 18 timetable isn't happening on May the 18th as planned. There will be a gradual build up. From Northern, it'll be about 60% of the service pre-COVID-19. There is another date now in September when the May timetable is likely to be introduced, assuming that everything goes to plan in terms of relieving the lockdown. Oops, I'm almost leaving the meeting, just bear with me, let's cancel that. So yeah, that's the timetable. You've got the National Rail timetable that the public see, and then there's the working timetable. That includes all freight movements, empty stock movements, movements off the depots, also includes head codes, intermediate and timing points, and all the allowances that are used to build the timetable. Just bear with me. Otherwise, I'm not moving on a page. Just bear with me. There we go. You watch, it'll go loads. It'll move 3 or 4 now. So timescales, 16 months out. Network Rail. Just hang on, I've skipped one. No. Established a long-term engineering plan as part of the upgrade works. That's within the period of the new timetable. 14 months out, train and freight operators then have to give advance notice of their intended timetables, and then 16 months out is the train of the freight companies formally submit the new timetable, and then for the next 3 months Network Rail works on that new timetable from these bids, ensuring it all works together. So I just try to use 2 screens here. Right, I'm on the right page now. Like I said before, I started with Network Rail. It's quite interesting. One project I was involved with was installing the turnout at Ardwick into what became the TPE depot at Ardwick. That required Piccadilly to be blocked for 2 weekends, and we were required to actually 16 months out get the agreements of all the train and freight operators that we could close the station. So that side and experience it also from the train operators side. So at 6 months out, Network Rail produced the rail industry, or provide the rail industry with a national base timetable, enabling operators to start planning the logistics and produce the rosters for the train staff and also the diagrams for the units. It does say 6 months, but some of the, I get emails in my inbox almost every day for the next day, so it's a fairly fluid process putting up rosters together. And then at 4 months, operators can bid for readjustments, take into account any special events. And again, Network Rail can work through them. Once you get to 3 months, that's the key date when it's fixed in stone, and the train operators can start selling advance purchase tickets. So getting anything changed within 3 months is now impossible. So then we've got rules of the route. Where's that disappeared to? Rules of the route is agreed with train operators, and this is basically, there are a number of sections within the rules of the route for those that aren't familiar with it, but that basically it highlights when routes are deemed to be available for engineering works. Anything outside of the rules then is classed as disruptive, and you have to go through the process of kind of arranging those 16 months out. As part of that, you've got a Schedule 4 regime, and that compensates the train operators for the financial impact of those possessions. There's 2 elements to it. There's a formula for calculating compensation for being prevented from using the network, and then the other one compensates them for additional staff costs, publicity costs, and the costs of things putting on replacement buses or anything else that's required. So a key element of putting together a timetable is sectional running times, and they're basically the time the train takes to get between 2 stations. A further factor is whether they stop at that station or whether they pass through, because we see naturally running from starting at rest to line speed and back to stop is slower than going through without stopping. So you've got start to stop, start to pass, i.e. start to pass through without stopping, pass to pass where you go through both locations without stopping, and pass to stop. So for every sectional running time has 4 of those. Then you've got a timing load for each type of train, which takes into account the acceleration, braking, high top speed, and those kind of characteristics. And you've also got the impact of gradient, so SRTs may vary in different directions depending on the gradients. So timing of a train on the basis of its full capability doesn't give you much scope for the variations that occur. And a base simulation may only assume that a proportion of tractive effort is used and that the braking rate is typical rather than being at a full emergency rate. So things like, the key one from my perspective, autumn, drivers will adopt a more professional driving, it's a professional driving style where braking is lighter and earlier, and taking power again is more gentle to avoid slipping. So that can have an impact on how the timetable operates. And there's other variations. The dwell time to station that's very busy in peak times is different to what it might be in the off-peak. There's also some allowances for additional time at various critical points to take into that kind of thing into account. Engineering time, this is things like temporary speed restrictions. It also applies, we've got an issue at the moment, so it's an issue that's, we're looking to run a railhead treatment train next autumn, or sorry, Network Rail is, between Seamer and Bridlington. It's a part of the world that we've not had a railhead treatment train down before, and it is quite a problematic area. Now, the railhead treatment train, as you might know, is 2 locomotives top and tailed around the railhead treatment train itself. And while the sectional running time is based on, for that locomotive, is based on a 40-mile-an-hour speed, the local conditions mean that locos are restricted to 30 miles an hour. So engineering time is used to make that up. And yeah, the planning rules lay down the amount of time that's allowed for planned engineering works. So other factors, performance time, that's where you're approaching a busy terminal and you may get some slower running. Obviously, we see that quite a lot with the Castlefield corridor. And similar to performance time, public book time, which was the odd bit of time added at various locations. It's something actually that as an industry we've been taking out over the last couple of years, and it has actually been an issue from a kind of on-time performance based perspective in maintaining the performance figures. And then you've got pathing time, and that's an allowance approaching junctions where you might get regulated for another train. It's not possible to adjust the timings to actually have them pass in parallel. So yeah, there's a few things that are used to build up the timetable. So looking at track layouts next, these are nice and simple. I don't know if anybody's been between Stourbridge and Stourbridge Junction. It literally just starts at Stourbridge Junction, goes to Stourbridge, change ends and come back again, and then repeat throughout the day. That's fairly unique, as is the circular line. I was tempted to say the circle in London, but on the London Underground, I'm not sure that's a pure circle anymore. The Glasgow subway, on the other hand, is literally trains just go round and round in opposite directions on the two lines. So double track layouts, there's a requirement for increased capacity. Double tracks were preferred from the single. They are complicated if you need to cross over. You can't easily overtake another moving train going in the same direction. And depending on the signalling system, you can carry 20 to 40 trains an hour. Improved capacity by flighting. Now, that's you see it quite often on the West Coast main line. If you ever stand at Milton Keynes on platform 6 for a length of time, you'll see a number of MT Pendolinos or Voyagers come flying through. There's a set pattern. I think there's a Birmingham, a Manchester, a Liverpool, and then there's a Chester train that calls at Milton Keynes. So that basically maximises the capacity by running 3 trains that don't stop one after the other, and then putting the stop in on the 4th. Quadruple track layouts, obviously that allows a certain amount of flexibility in overtaking. Now there's 2 layouts here. You've got pair by direction, where 2 tracks go in one direction and the parallel 2 tracks go in the other. And then you've got pair by use, where you've got up, down, up, down. Now, both have their advantages. Pair by direction gives the flexibility to cross from one track to the other without conflicting with the train coming in the opposite direction. Pair by use works where there's frequent junctions. Now, the Southwestern main line is a really good example of where the benefit is maximised in the outer sections beyond Wimbledon. Paired by direction, and then to Waterloo paired by use. That allows for the number of junctions that occur, and the fact you're not occupying tracks from trains coming the opposite way as much, so it increases capacity. It's interesting, between Stockport and Manchester as part of the West Coast route mod, a number of years ago now, was it about 16, there was a plan to change currently Stockport's pair by direction, and there was a project that was going to change the signalling system and change the track layout to pair by use. Stockport was shut for about 6 weeks. Then there was some issue with the signalling system. It all finished up not happening. Looking at Stockport today, it's a real shame that never happened, because you look at things like Headsley Junction, where you've got 2 tracks coming in from Buxton direction and 2 tracks coming in from Chester, and in both cases trains coming off the branch or going onto the branch have got to cross, effectively got a conflicting route, so it does reduce capacity. That would have been a major benefit to have had that today. Your standard junction involves having a facing turnout, a trailing turnout, and a fixed diamond or a movable diamond. Obviously, there you haven't got the flexibility of grade separation, so that takes a bit of organising. Clearly, the most efficient mode of operation is to organise the timetables, have trains passing in parallel onto the branch or onto the main route. Then you've got the grade separation, which is the ultimate efficient junction. And then looking the other way, you've got the single lead, where you've got trains going in different directions, sharing the same track across the junction. Clearly that constrains capacity. It's also led to a couple of collisions. A number of years ago, there was one at Newton in Glasgow. They were fairly close together. The other one was at High Junction in the early 90s. They were both around about the same time. Termini, again, except for a closed loop, you must have some kind of facility at the end of the line to turn trains round. The layout on the diagram is the most effective layout. This 4-platform system with the 2 pairs of crossovers, Waterloo and Cannon Street are both built with multiples of 4 platforms to allow this efficient operation. So basically, you can have 3 lots of trains coming in and out of the station in parallel at the same time, and then basically a train then out of platform 1 creates a conflicting move. So coming into platform 1, but then the cycle can then start again. So that basically, although it looks complicated, it is a really efficient mode of operation and maximises the ability to run trains in and out of the station. I'm struggling to see my slides at the moment. That's better. So, timing points, sectional running times, how long they take to run from station to station. Interestingly, a couple of years ago, I trained to be a conductor. We had an industrial dispute. We were looking for managers to work as conductors. I signed the Liverpool to Wigan North Western route. Now, at the time I first started, the line had recently been, well, only within a couple of years, been electrified, and electric units were used on the line. The SRTs at the time were based on the diesel units that previously operated. So it was actually quite it was fairly straightforward maintaining punctuality. During the course of the industrial action, it went on for a couple of years. We went through a timing change and the SRTs were changed to reflect the performance of the 319 electric units, and suddenly it became a bit more challenging. Interestingly, the same thing's happening again now with the new 331 units, which again have got improved performance on the acceleration and braking on the 319s. So again, you've got a little bit of a honeymoon period. The only issue with the 331s is that the door arrangements are a bit more difficult. You can't open and close the doors quite as quickly, so it's not quite the benefit that we should have got. So yeah, you need to make an allowance diagram there, sorry. You need to make arrangements at the end of one journey to send a train back on another. You know, do you need a crew change? Do you need to build in time for that? Bare minimum, you need sufficient time for the crew to change ends, change the information systems on the train, although again, modern trains tend to do that automatically. How long you need to send in station loading and unload between peak and off peak? How long can you run without fueling and maintenance? It's all got to be factored in. Electric trains don't need fuel, they can run all day. And then, yeah, there's the other issue with the route availability, and different vehicles are confined to certain routes by virtue of electrification, any gauging restrictions or axle weight restrictions. Just talking again about the RHTTs, we've had a circuit in Yorkshire that there was a gauge restriction, bridge 57 at Wunwell, which meant the only locomotive that could pass underneath it was a class 20. And these were 60-year-old locomotives and hopelessly unreliable. In March of this year, bridge 57 has been demolished and is being rebuilt. So we've got the full structure gauge, so we'll be able to run 66s next year. So that's a major benefit. Looking forward to having that next autumn. Right, why are we not? Seems to be a bit of a lag in the screen's changing. Go back the other way. I'm just working from quite an old laptop here. I don't know if there's it's having to think about it. Just hang on. Right. Oh, well, I shut the. Sorry, I have the. Right, let's do it again, shall we? Right, can you see? Does it come back up again?
We can see the front screen without it
Right.
in presenting mode.
Yeah.
So yeah, Rob. So if you find the slide you were
Right. Okay.
you were.
Yeah. Thank you. Right. Let's. Sorry about that. I don't know. It just seemed to freeze. Oops, gone too far now. So that was the slide one, wasn't it? Okay. So the next constraint when you're building a timetable is the signalling system. This basically enforces a safe separation of trains. It also is the kind of constraint to the frequency you can operate and the speed you can run at. The minimum time interval between consecutive trains is the headway. It allows trains to run at the full permitted speed without having to brake the train and the speed at which they run that are used. And depending, we'll see in a couple of minutes on some slides what if you're kind of not sure about 3 and 4 aspects. But basically a 3 aspect is your red, your amber, green, or red, yellow, green. So basically a driver should only see one signal section from getting a yellow signal. There's only one signal section before the red. So that tends to be used on lower speed, lower frequency routes. 4 aspect, you've got the green, double amber, double yellow, single yellow, red. So you're going along, you've got a green, and you see a double yellow. So that's slow. You're starting to slow down to the double yellow, and then you've got 2 signal sections before the red to brake. So that's why in the calculation. You've got the T3's got 2 signal spacings. The O is an overlap. It's called an overlap, and it's basically the distance beyond the signal. It's like a safety allowance. L is the length of the train. V is the train speed. And basically 10 is 10-second allowance for sighting. So if we move on, this helps explain it. The train's going along. The minimum separation basically between train 1 and train 2 are the 2 signal spacings, plus the overlap between train 1 and signal 3, and the length of the train. The 4 aspects, you've got effectively that longer separation, but that can basically allow you to have a higher speed, or sorry, it doesn't mean a longer separation. It basically means you can have a higher speed, or if they're closer together, you can have more frequent services. And again, you've got the length of the signal sections plus the overlap plus the length of the train when calculating the headway. So the bare minimum time is known as the green to green. So this is the time elapsing between any given signal being passed at green and again showing green for the next train. If you ever stood on a platform, particularly at night, if it's nice and straight, and you've got the particularly the 4 aspect signals, you see a train go through, signal behind it will turn to red, and then fairly quickly, if it's going at speed, that'll go to double yellow. Sorry, single yellow, double yellow, and then green. So that the headway time, that for each signal's within the view of a driver for long enough to be noticed. Obviously, that's key. You think back to Ladbroke Grove, one of the key issues with the driver passing the signal at danger was the overhead line gantry limited the amount of time he had to see the signal. And obviously, he didn't survive, so we'll never know the actual cause of why that happened. Just bear with me a minute. Just grab a drink. So, compiling the timetable. Factors driving the developments. Is it an intensively worked suburban railway or an intercity type operation? Timetable would probably be structured to exploit capacity for the most efficient specific use. So you look at somewhere, you compare Waterloo with King's Cross, and you see how they'd be different operations in terms of the timetable. More regional railway in Coral Reef, more driven by minimising costs and aiming for the most efficient use of rolling stock and crews. Both cases, the key influence results from the government requirement for capacity provision or cost reduction. We see that with the franchising process, that each line of route has a specification for first and last trains, journey times, frequencies, and all of that has to be taken into account when building the timetable. There's also got to be consideration for open access operators. Now, they've been quite prevalent on the East Coast almost since the start of privatisation with Grand Central and Hull trains. Clearly now, well, it was supposed to be made, but it's not happening now, but there's a new open access operator starting from Blackpool, running down to Eton, who wants to run 6 trains a day. So space has got to be found for them in the timetable. There was talk as well of Virgin starting an open access operation from Liverpool, but not heard anything of that for a while. But it's all got to be taken into account on the particularly south of Rugby, where the tracks are pretty close to capacity as it is. So building a schedule for a single trip is obviously fairly straightforward. You've got the appropriate point-to-point timings that's summated, station dwell times added, and any allowances added. You obviously may start forward timing it. So you decide that you want to leave at midday and work forwards. Back timing, maybe more appropriate for commuter railway if you want your train to arrive at a particular peak period. So you start with the arrival time and then work back, subtracting time. Or you might have the situation where you've got a critical intermediate station, so you back time into that and then forward time thereafter. There's a number of ways of doing it. So yeah, taking the King's Cross as an example, you might want to start with your 10 o'clock from King's Cross if that's your long-standing, well-established departure. As I mentioned before, you might be looking for a commuter train to come in at a fairly convenient time in the peak. Clearly on a multi-user railway out on the west coast, you've got that conflict. You've got to fit the local commuter service and the express. Sorry, and then where you've got the multi-user railway, highly likely the operator wants to change his timetable. You clearly can't benefit one operator over the other when you're putting a timetable together, and particularly if that's a long distance operator, because the impact of any changes will affect the railway further beyond the terminal. So you fix one train, the others have got to follow logically. So next in the plan might be the previous or the next working. Depends on the terminal turnaround. Again, thinking back to that 4-platform arrangement and how that might work with the trains, maximising the potential for parallel moves in and out of the terminus. You might have an hourly pattern, or you might have connections en route which determine the times at stations that you want to aim for. Key junctions may be critical. Ensuring that, as mentioned before, that you make a parallel move on that junction and you're not being regulated. Therefore, the remit of the train planner is to get the most use out of limited resources, in which case regular service intervals might be secondary. Think of the Castlefield corridor, how you fit freight, long distance trains going to Edinburgh and Glasgow, with all stations to Southport or Liverpool Lime Street. It's all different characteristics, braking, different passenger loadings, people with luggage, wheelchairs. Yes, allowances have got to be made. So the final step. So as each trip's added, plan has to check the headways, junction margins aren't infringed, adjust the timings accordingly. As the timetable builds up, further trains are forced into particular timings by 3 slots, remaining on each point of the route. Eventually, you resort to pathing time to make everything fit, or you hope you can. Lost capacity arising from mixed fast and slow trains on the same line can be minimised, as I mentioned earlier, with flighting. So you're running your fast trains together in groups. If they're ultimately going to different locations, it's not too difficult to organise. And so yeah, fastest first, slowest last. The other thing, to maximise capacity, you could look at harmonising train speeds by allocating a number of stops to each, or possibly grouping stops. So we've seen that. There was a train I used to use coming into Manchester that traditionally the stopping service between Stockport and Manchester calls at Heaton Chapel and Levenshulme. What we did try doing was stopping the first train at Levenshulme and the second train at Heaton Chapel, and that enabled both trains to clear the section quicker and help capacity. So that kind of thing could be adopted. You look at high-speed lines, every train's running at the same high speed. So again, that's maximising the capacity on that route. If you also have grade separated junctions, then it promotes the most efficient use of the line. So this is for about the 1990s. Most timetable planning was done manually on using graphs, and this is an automated version, but you can imagine it'd be a similar thing out. You can see at the top left where the two lines, the trains going in different directions, they cross. That's a parallel move at a junction. The little stubby lines, they've come in from a branch line. The freight train, obviously you can see it's travelling at a certain speed, and it's put in a loop to allow there's two trains to pass it before it comes out again. And then also in the bottom right, you can see that little step where a train's made a station stop. So you can see from that where you've got lines running parallel at a fairly steep angle, you can run more trains than you would otherwise. You're making the maximum use of the capacity. The other thing that accompanies the graph is a platform occupation chart. So this is just a simple graph showing trains in the platform through the time period, and highlights any conflicting moves in or out of station. So as I said, up until 1990, it was all timetable planning was all done by graph. By hand-drawn graphs, sorry. Computer packages are now available, and it was a question I sat with some of our timetable planners. We were trying to put some extra time in on the route to Chester through Northwich in autumn, just to put an extra couple of minutes in to just help maintain punctuality. That's quite a tricky route because you've got single line sections at effectively either end. You've got Molesworth to Mickle Trafford and Deansgate Junction almost to Edgeley Junction, and it was actually really difficult. The planner had kind of a cursor on the map, and he could move the trains around on the system to try and find a path for both, which would incorporate the additional time, but it was actually proved impossible to do in this instance. So by specifying a key time and stopping pattern, you create a trip schedule, that can be created and translated into a graphical representation, which is what we were doing with the when we were looking at putting the autumn time onto the Chester route. So yeah, you got the more sophisticated systems with you can nudge and drag and drop, and also these systems now much more than the paper. You're able to exchange data between offices and between train operators and Network Rail much quicker than it was done previously. This is then extended into rolling stock and crew diagramming, but there's also interfaces with packages for that. Although you'd be amazed, there's still people in Manchester, Liverpool, all the major centres manually completing schedules for train crew. Yeah, I found this quite an interesting cartoon of how it used to be done back in the 30s. I think this is London South Western, so this is Waterloo. That's how it's, yeah, London West timetable planning. Now, that's it. I just wanted to, just got another slide on well, it's an Excel spreadsheet. So if I just bear with me a minute. Not that one. Why is it not picked up? Oh, here we go. Flash drive. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? There we go. Won't be a minute. It's just coming up now. So, right, can you see an Excel spreadsheet now?
Yes, we can, Rob.
All right, good. Okay, so this is basically an exercise we've been doing. A lot of the trains now are fitted with GPS systems, and we can track the performance of the train compared with the sectional running times. So this is a run we've been doing from Southport to Wigan, and basically you can see as we go through it how the sectional running times don't match what's actually happening. So the plan is to use this to work with the timetable planners to improve the timetable. And this is basically we're looking at the May 21 timetable, such as the long process it takes. So you leave Southport, you've got to 300 second sectional running time to the next station at Mells Cop. That's for the first 100 seconds, there's a 10 mile an hour speed. Then it raises to a 20, pretty well all the way to Mells Cop. So that is fairly flat. And basically the red and the blue line are this is basically thousands of runs, and that's the highest and lowest line effectively. So you look at Mells Cop, the best train, the red line was arriving slightly early, the blue was arriving down time. It's got a 30-second dwell time. Interestingly, well, actually, no, it's not, because the conductor's doing the right thing and he's waiting the right time before he leaves, which is why the red time and the blue line leave Mells Cop at the same time. So then you got, instead of being a nice smooth raise and peak and then start to break down into Besker Lane, there is a PSR over a level crossing, so that explains that dip there. And again, it's something, you know, that looking at this is something we can do with that level crossing to improve sighting, or you know, could we put lights on it? Because it's only it'll be a farm crossing probably. But you see then you've got a 270-second SRT between Mells Cop and Besker Lane, and none of the trains are actually getting there. And from the grey bar with the dwell time, you can see that it's late in and late out. So let's scroll along a bit more. So Besker Lane to New Lane is quite a nice even curve with very little you know, speeds or anything. Although you look, we don't actually make New Lane on time. Most trains are arriving shortly after they should have left. So that's something that we need to look at with the timetable planners. And then as you scroll along, we've got a 60-minute dwell time at Burscough Bridge, but again, we're barely just getting in as we should be leaving. Another PSR for a crossing between Burscough Bridge and Hosker. And as we scroll along, you can see we're losing even more time as we get to Parbold. Interestingly, the variation between best and worst between Hosker and Parbold, it's something that we're actually looking at. Again, there is a speed restriction. Coming out of Hosker, you've got a level crossing, and it's protected by a signal. So some of the faster trains that are on the red line are catching the signal, which is why the impact is higher than the ones that accelerate slower, which is the blue line. Appleby Bridge, sorry. Again, you'd just be on the departure time when you're arriving. Just press the wrong part of the. Again, Gatter. So it's getting gradually worse and worse. Then you come into Wigan, and you've got the 20 into Wigan Moorgate. Got 120-second dwell time at Wigan Moorgate. Clearly, we're getting there before the departure time, but then you've got to get a lot of people on and off. So we're leaving late, and then it's heading off towards Manchester. I don't think this goes much further. No. So again, Hindley, you can see. So there's some work there to try and get the sectional running times increased at various locations, and or ask the question about could we raise, is it necessary for that 20 before you get to Mel's Cop? It's going to be quite interesting looking at how we do this over the next few years. So that's basically all my slides. So has anybody got any questions?
If you'd like to ask a question, just unmute your mic or feel free to type in a question and I can ask it of Rob.
Sorry, Rob, I had some IT difficulty right at the beginning. Can you just have a look at your second and third slides again?
Right, let's have a go.
I think they were probably just introductory, but you went over them quite quickly, and I.
Yeah, right. So is that come up now?
All right. Yes, thanks. So it was just like I think it must have been the third one. I didn't.
So yeah, there's 3 sections. So,
right. Yeah. So you were it was just like your introductory bit, then, was it? Yes.
Just a bit of an introductory, yeah. So just saying how we develop the operators develop the timetable and Network Rail validate it.
Right.
It should be updated twice a year, but obviously this year with COVID-19, May's actually looking like it's going to be September. And then you've got the National Rail Timetable, which is a public-facing one. The working timetable's got a bit more detail with the allowances and the freight trains, empty stock moves. And then, yeah, I skipped over the working timetable. Also includes head codes. I didn't really explain those. It's a way of identifying individual trains. The first digit relates to the class of the train. So 1 is an express, 2 is a stopping train, and then you got 3, 4, 5 is various empty stocks and freight trains. Some of it's pretty historic. One of them relates to unfitted freight trains. So they were ones that weren't air braked or vacuum braked throughout, had a guard span on the back. I don't think we see too many of them anymore. There was a new one, a Class 9, was introduced when Eurostar started running. And that's used for Eurostar and Virgin also. Sorry, Virgin, Aventi.
Rob.
Hello.
Rob, Class 9
yes.
Is historic. It was originally for an unbraked train, and for whatever wisdom, and those of us who operated signals questioned it, the Eurostar was given Class 9. Instead of cascading things down, Eurostar was, to the humour of the signalling fraternity, was given the lowest class of train going, instead of being put into the top category. You know, because it was supposed to be fast, and to be given the Class 9 rating was just, to signalling minds, was just ludicrous. But you know, this sadly is the railway industry.
Well, thanks for that. Anything else? Anybody else has got anything to ask?
Rob, can you just go to the Julian Heathcote from York here? Could you just go to the speed diagram you had right at the very end, please?
Ooh, that's probably the easiest way, isn't it? That.
The graph.
The graph.
The Excel spreadsheet.
No. Oh, sorry. Just hang on. Right. Oh, escape. That's probably right.
That one.
Excel. Right.
How much is? Yeah, that's come up now.
Yeah.
How much? I can see the late running there. How much is that an effect of professional driving compared to the old days of driving when you drove on the brakes?
That's a good question. It would be interesting, particularly around autumn. Yeah, it's a difficult one to use a GPS to compare, because obviously everybody drives to that professional and like I mentioned with the level crossing just after Hosker, you know, yeah, in days gone by, there would probably have been an acceleration in the expectation of that signal being cleared. Whereas now, yeah, it's the more cautious approach.
I'm thinking that could be that could actually be the reason why the trains are not making the making the SRTs.
Right, the SRTs they're probably historic, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah.
They come from another time.
So
and it's amazing, isn't it? When you think of the acceleration that, I mean, these are now in the hands of 150 sprinters, which presumably are, well, they are a better performing than the first generation and the loco haul that went before them. So, yeah, it's interesting that that could be the difference.
Rob, Paul Ebbert's asked a question. He says, how easy is it to change quickly between timetables, i.e. should there be a perturbation? He uses the Wessex main line and he often gets frustrated when a simple timetable appears obvious to him, but they persist with the programme timetable.
That's an interesting one. I mean, what we have at times of perturbation, difficult word to say that, is in the control office there are a number of contingency plans which are normally implemented to try and recover the service. Is that what I'm trying to think what I know it's a different world down there in the way they operate. But
Rob, could I answer it, because I have done some tolerance down there. It is actually quite difficult with the with all the diagrams to do, the train crews and whatever, to try and get back from the simple timetable back to the normal timetable. In times of perturbation, there's an awful lot to think about. Obviously, the main aim of the control is to recover the timetable as quickly as possible. But with all the different train crew diagrams, stock diagrams, and the timetable, it is extremely complicated to try and get anything back, simply because also the other thing is with all the suburban services mixing in with the mainline services, that takes an awful lot to do it. And one of the main problems, I think, is that the train crews tend to interwork between the main lines and the suburban services. So there will be some intermixing between, not masses, but there will be some intermixing, which can then find that you can't get the train crew in the right place to get the next service, which might seem logical.
Yeah. It is a major issue.
I've done timing on the southern, that's
right. No, that's really helpful, thanks. I mean, was it Southern that recently changed their timetable to try and minimize the different routes that train crew were operating on? Try and improve at that time when that kind of thing happens.
The new Southern timetable is very different from the previous timetable, I think it's safe in saying. The benefits are obviously yet to be seen because the timetable hasn't come into operation yet. There are quite a bit of easing out of the headways between the trains to improve, which should improve the service in various different key areas. There are some very good improvements which should come along. I say, unfortunately, we're going to have to wait till towards the end of the year before we see all the full benefits. By the looks of it, if we're looking at September, October time before we get back up to it, then that will be the situation. But yeah, there are some big things.
it is going to be interesting to see how we get on May the 18th, when even putting 60% back is going to be quite challenging, just from the fact that it's a timetable that's had to be created in a very short period of time. Based on both in terms of the operators doing. I mean, we were, if this had been normal times, we'd have been timetable plans would be putting our autumn timetables to Network Rail validation now. But that's gone out the window with all the kind of temporary timetabling that's been going on. So yeah, the fact that everything has been changed in a matter of weeks, rosters will all need to be adapted accordingly. We've actually got quite an interesting challenge with this new CAF fleet. They have to have a 26-hour brake test. So there is an allowance for the driver, 10-minute allowance for the driver, first train of the day, to carry out the brake test. And if he doesn't do it, then at some point within the first couple of hours, it just comes to a stand somewhere and has to have a hard reset. So it's making sure, for us, it's making sure that all those are reflected in the timetable and the rosters for a week on Monday. Because we have found that these issues with the brake tests, they come in bow waves whenever there is a significant change to the timetable. Over the last couple of weeks, when we were coming back down, I suspect going back up again is going to have the same issue. And there's loads of different factors like that you've got to take into account.
I think the timetablers over the past 8 weeks, and obviously looking forward as well, have been working extremely hard, and obviously the roster people, to stop diagrammers and the crew diagrammers, have been working extremely hard. And yes, there will be teething problems, but I think overall, considering the time they've had to do it in, it will be a very good service. I do stress in the time they've had to do it is, I'm not saying they're not going to be in teething problems, but in the sheer time they've had to do it, they will be it'll be a excellent effort on for all of them.
Yeah, I mean, we've been, from a performance perspective, the last few weeks, with hardly having any passengers and running 25% of the service, performance has been particularly spectacular. So the challenge for us is how do we maintain that through as we ramp up. So yeah.
Hi Rob, it's David Worsley in from the York section again. I was just wondering, as somebody on the inside of it, then, do you have any reflections on May 18 or any of the timetable changes in the past which haven't worked? I know you could probably talk for an hour about it, but
yeah, I mean, the rule of thumb, and historically when I was at Network Rail, I used to be involved with the railhead treatment trains, and we were always kind of evolving the timetable rather than throwing it up in the air and starting again. And you look back at history, you think of Virgin's Operation Princess in the early 2000s, where they brought in the voyages, centered everything around New Street, and that initially was fairly spectacularly unsuccessful and had to be changed. Again, with West Midlands, their timetable last year, you could almost see the long through journeys. There was Crewe to Euston that went via Alsager, Kidsgrove, Stoke, then round to New Street and then down to Euston, and other services were joining and uncoupling at New Street. And you see that their punctuality went down. But yeah, May 18 was quite interesting because from the northern perspective and being on the inside, we found out in about February that the Bolton corridor wouldn't have been electrified for the May timetable change. That basically meant that we had to find 40 effective additional diesel vehicles, i.e. 20 two-car units, to operate the Bolton corridor in the absence of electrification. So it was pretty obvious. It was like being on an oil tanker heading for an iceberg. But late March, April, it wasn't possible to change anything, and the whole system was likely to fall apart, and it did. Yeah, it was a very challenging time, that, and it was something we've struggled to recover from.
I think one of the areas with that is if you look at the Select Committee inquiry into the May 18 timetable, David, then it's very interesting what is said, and obviously also what is not said. I suggest you look at that, which should be on the Parliamentary TV channel somewhere, I believe, somewhere. But it is very interesting to see exactly decisions that should have been made at certain times that weren't made by people who weren't necessarily in the industry. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Rob, another question from the chat function is, can dwell times be reduced if there's less passengers, or maybe allow longer if social distancing, people can't rush on board close together? Do dwell times vary normally between peak and off-peak?
No, they don't vary between off-peak and peak, which is quite frustrating. Or certainly not in the ones, along with this GPS survey, we have been looking, there is some, but the vast majority actually stay the same. One of the things with social distancing that I'm hoping will be a benefit is that people will actually stand the full length of the platform, and we get a fairly even number of people getting on through each set of doors. One of the real frustrations when I've been working trains as a conductor, you've got a dozen people waiting for 2 sets of doors, and you want to shout at them to move down, and it's really frustrating that there's doors with nobody trying to get in and out of, and we have spoken about some kind of information campaign from the kind of May the 18th to spread out a bit more. But yeah, I mean, again, one of the frustrations is that, I don't know if obviously we've missed the 5 o'clock pronouncement today, but everybody's waiting to hear from the government what's going to be relaxed. It may be today, it may be Sunday, but
yeah,
it doesn't give us as an industry very long to prepare for. So there's I think eventually we're looking at if you go into Tesco's, they've used tape on the floor to mark out 2 metre squares. I think eventually we've been looking at that, which would be quite an interesting to see how they work that. Obviously, they've only got nowhere near as many stations as we have, so I'm not sure it'd be practical for Northern to do that. But yeah, it's a bit unknown at the moment, but hopefully, like I say, as the announcements are made, we might have a better idea, because there was talk the other week of staggering people's working hours, which long term actually may be a benefit when you think there's so much resource thrown into operating peak services, and a lot of trains and train crew are under resourced for the period between the peaks. So if you can spread that out, encourage people either to start earlier or later. I think you see it in kind of the southeast already, just because of the sheer numbers of people that use the rail network down there. But whether that kind of behaviour can be encouraged in the regional areas.
Anyone for any more before we finish off?
Rob, it's John Parker here. Just a
Hello,
quick
Rob.
question. Hello.
Hello, John.
Hello there.
Hello.
Yeah, just a question on the performance graph for the Wigan Southport line. The restrictions you talk about, are they? Do you know if they're sighting or curvature or?
I believe the sighting.
Right. Okay.
It's something we're looking at. It's interesting that one of the other routes we looked at was Blackpool South to Preston, and Moss Side. You come out there and there's a crossing.
Yeah.
I think it's called Hesketh Crossing, which is on a slight doesn't look, I mean, we've only been out to Google Maps and looked at it, but it's on a bit of a curve. And it's quite interesting that the line speed on the outside of the curve is 70, which is what it is on the route predominantly. And yet on the inside of the curve, it's only 20. It seems a massive differential. I can appreciate it is the sighting, but it does 50 miles an hour for what doesn't seem that tight a curve. So it's one we're going to investigate. That one stands out particularly.
That is a big difference. Yeah.
It's a massive difference. Yeah. It's a massive. Is there anything beyond the crossing that could account for it, or is there any track defect?
Not that we're aware of. One of the things we're doing with this exercise is consulting with train crews to see what, you know, they're the people that are out there all the time. You know, what else could be out there? You're right, but we've not had anything back yet.
Well, I mean, in terms of signal sighting, such things as banner repeaters overcome that. So it would suggest that there's a lot more to it than meets the eye to give a 50 mile an hour difference in speed.
Well, that's a single line with only one. It's only occupied by one train at a time. I think there's one signal section about halfway down it. So there aren't even any signals.
Perhaps it's the fact that it's a single line then. Perhaps it's that.
Possibly it's something we need to look into.
We can all go online and download the sectional appendix, can't we?
Rob,
yeah, well, this is what I've done as part of this. Go on.
Could you answer the proverbial question from the public? And that is why we constantly create new timetables, given that we've been doing it for 150 years. Isn't it time we got one that worked and stuck to it?
Yeah.
This is the public perception. You've been doing this for all this time. How come by now you haven't come up with the ideal timetable? And once you've got it, leave it alone.
Stick with it. Well, this is what I said earlier, that the optimum solution is to kind of just chip at the one that there is and improve it, take odd little, rather than take big lumps out and change it.
You know, and then, of course, there's the other thing about how about doing some track improvements, like, for example, the curves that, for example, the Bacon factory curve at Ipswich, that's made trains in and out of Felixstowe far more effective. You know, why can't we put more resources into creating some more grade separated junctions? Why can't we look at, you know, things like the Bacon factory curve, which was absolutely brilliant, and then there's the Doncaster flyover, and you know, is it time that the engineering department looked at how can we make the thing run far more effectively by continuing to do the simple jobs like Doncaster flyover, like Bacon factory curve, and diagram them into ongoing repairs and maintenance. Because the difference is phenomenal. It's far more effective than trying to increase speed by 10 miles an hour, as the Bacon factory curve has proved. You know, is it time the industry can use this in a different way?
Well,
I'm not sure. I'm sure. Sorry, Rob.
I was just going to say, the only problem with new infrastructures we saw with the Ordsall curve, that seemed to cause part of the problem. That's been a major contribution to the problem. You know, a lot of our punctuality problems that occur in getting trains through the Castlefield corridor. Obviously, the original plan was to have platforms 15 and 16 at Piccadilly, and Oxford Road was going to be extended to 8 platform lengths and made fully accessible. I mean, Oxford Road at the moment has got 5 platforms. One of the 3 platforms hardly ever gets used because it's not accessible. It doesn't have a lift. You can only get to it with stairs. So, you know, that's a major handicap for trying to get that throughput of 16 trains an hour through the corridor. For me, looking at these graphs, you know, a lot of the infrastructure dates, you know, the physical infrastructure was cut back through the 60s, 70s and 80s as the services were declining. We're now operating a lot more services over those, and it's those kind of restrictions, the single line between Edgeley Junction and Deansgate and Molesworth and Mickle Trafford, some of the restrictions on the Hatfield line, if anybody knows that. You know, if we could straighten some of those out. I mean, the Hatfield line's another classic. The overhead electric obviously dates from the 50s, 1500 volt DC system. So when it was upgraded to 25 kVA in the 80s, the clearances for 25 kVA under the overbridges are insufficient. So you've got a 60 mile an hour speed along there. And that must be really frustrating for Transpennine Express, who operate diesels through there. So they're not even working there, you know, using the overheads. There's anomalies, so many anomalies knocking around that if we could, I'd rather straighten them out. The other thing with the Hatfield is it's still got a lot of the old ceramic insulator pots. So that also limits the speed. Could find some way of insulating the underside of the bridges and replacing the insulator pots with modern materials. You know, we could probably run at 75 and create a bit more capacity.
Guys, this is all really interesting. Oh, sorry, Rob.
Sorry, yes.
No, I'm just conscious of losing people off the call, so I'm happy for the chat to continue. But before we lost many more people, first of all, I wanted to say thank you very much to yourself for presenting, and also I just wanted to put a call out from the PWI. If anybody else is interested or knows anyone else who would be interested in doing a virtual presentation, if they can get in contact with Kay Hatwell at secretary@thepwi.org. That would be great. Or if you don't have those details and you have mine, please feel free to drop me a line and I can forward them on. But yes, I just wanted to round the meeting up. But then if people do want to continue talking, then please feel free to discuss. But thank you everyone for joining us.
I can't stay too much longer. I've got a horse that wants to come in.
Right, guys, then.